Good morning, Mr. Dursley. Would you raise your hand and say the words of the oath, please? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Good morning.
Morning.
You are Graeme Dursley,
That's correct.
and you are a temporary detective inspector, is that correct?
I was until yesterday, but I've just been promoted into rank.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
What age are you, detective inspector?
I'm 44 years old.
And in 2015, during May 2015, when the events we're discussing, what rank were you when you were involved in the inquiry into...
I was a detective sergeant.
Thank you. And you joined the police in 1996?
That's correct.
And at that time, as I understand your statement, at paragraph 10, you were the line manager for Wayne Parker and Callum Clayton. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
We've also heard from a DC Mitchell, Andrew Mitchell. Did you have a line managerial responsibility in relation to him?
Not at that time, he worked at a different station.
Right. Was he at Leavenmouth or
I think he was actually at Glenorthis.
Glenorthis? Now, this morning we've been given some additional documents which may assist you. I understand their rank and postings and training records, and a copy will be made available to everyone else in due course. They'll be SBPI 00271, and we've given you a copy just in case you want to refer to it or you need to look at it at all today. And can you see the blue folder in front of you?
Yes.
Please feel free to open it. These are for your assistance if you wish them at any point today. There's copies in there of statements that you've given. We'll go through these in a moment. And there is a copy of the rank postings and training records as well, which I think is at the rear.
Okay.
And as I understand it, that contains details of your postings and rank throughout your career with the police, and also all the training courses that you've attended. And if you want to refer to that, just let me know.
Okay.
Let's have a look first of all at some statements that you've given previously. So could we look at perk 00136? Now you'll see as we come to this that this is going to be coming up on the screen in front of you. And if you prefer, you can just simply look at the screen. If I want to refer to anything, it'll come up there. If you don't feel comfortable looking at the screen, you've got the hard copies in the blue folder.
Okay.
So this is, as I understand it, an operational statement by yourself, Graeme Dursley. Your occupation is given as Detective Sergeant, and if we can just go down the page slightly. It says the date of the statement is the 4th of May 2015 at 1100 hours. And it's self, so that was a self-penned statement by you. You wrote this yourself.
That's correct.
Others have called them operational statements. Is that right? And this was done by you at Leavenmouth. And am I right in saying that this was the day after you became involved in the investigation into... Sorry, maybe I'll need to get you to speak into that.
Okay.
I think that's what the concern is, maybe that people can't hear you as well as they might.
Okay, apologies.
No, it's not your fault. Don't worry about it. I'll make sure that when you answer the questions, if you can be speaking into the microphone,
Yeah,
that'll help.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. So let's just go back over this. It's an operational statement on the screen at the moment from the day after Mr. Bio died, the 4th of May 2015. You wrote this yourself at 11 in the morning on that date.
That's correct.
And were you doing your best on that date to give a true and accurate record of your involvement in these events?
Yes, I was.
Thank you. I think in paragraph 5 of your inquiry statement, you've said that your recollection then was better than it is now. Is that fair to say?
I agree with that.
Thank you. And then let's look at PERC 00137. So this is a separate statement that will come up on the screen. And again, you've got your hard copy in your folder in front of you. This is a statement taken on the 11th of June 2015 at 10:50 hours. So that's just over a month later.
Yes.
And it was taken by Ross Stewart in the presence of Brian Dodd at Leavenmouth Police Office.
Yes.
And as I understand it, these are two individuals who came to speak to you on behalf of PERC.
That's correct.
And you were asked to clarify some of the points that you'd made in your previous operational statement.
Yes.
And again, were you doing your best to give a true and accurate record of your involvement that day?
Yes.
Thank you. And then can we look at PERC 00138? Now this is another statement. This one's dated the 14th of December 2015 at 9:30. And you wrote this yourself at Kirkcaldy Police Station.
Yes.
And again, were you doing your best to give a true and accurate record of the involvement you'd had in the investigation in relation to Mr. Bio?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll come back to this in a moment. And then can we turn to your inquiry statement? And this is SBPI 00228. And this will, you've got a hard copy in your folder, and this will come up on the screen in a moment. And while we wait for that to happen, I'll just say you can tell us from the hard copy you have, it's 41 pages long. There's 202 paragraphs. And if we look at the final page, we can see that you've signed it on the final page and all the pages, in fact, on the 12th of January this year.
That's correct, yes.
Now, when it does come up on the screen, we won't see your signature. It'll be redacted, but it's there on your hard copy.
That's correct.
And if we look at the final paragraph, which is 202, right at the end, just above your signature, if we can see paragraph 202, it says, "I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website." And you understand that that's the case?
Yes.
Thank you. And again, you've done your best in this statement to the inquiry, although obviously a number of years later, to be truthful and to give an accurate account of what was happening
Yes.
at the time.
Yes.
Now, as well as these statements, if we begin by looking at paragraph 18 of this inquiry statement, and you'll see that you've given us a number of details about something called a daybook, and this is between paragraphs 18 to 30. And in paragraph 19, you talk about daybooks, and I'll come to those in a moment, but you explain the difference between a daybook and a notebook. Just for everyone who's listening, could you tell us what the difference is between those two documents?
A police notebook is something that's issued to all officers, and the expectation is officers would use a notebook to complete and include important information from their days on duty as a police officer. So in addition to that, I keep a daybook, which is more for generally, keeping details of what staff are on duty, potentially if there's welfare issues, something that you may not want to put in a formal police notebook. But over the years, the way I've used my daybook is, on occasions, I have included things in it which may also go in a police, or should go in a police notebook. So I have, on occasions, and this is a perfect example, lifted my daybook when I've left the office, and when I'm getting updates, I've scribbled them in a daybook as opposed to putting the notes in my police notebook.
And if we look at paragraph 22, first of all, and we'll look at this in a moment, we see I wrote in my notebook on page 1, and you've given a date, Sunday the 3rd of May 2015. Short Peyton Walker went for Nicole Tomlinson, baton to head. And let's look for a moment at PS 01066, please. And so this is the document we see on the screen. It's 2 pages really of a lined book. Now, is that your daybook or your notebook?
That's my daybook.
That's your daybook.
Yes.
So we can see handwriting there. Left hand side it says Sunday 3rd May 2015. Right hand side we see Colette Bell's name at the top.
That's correct.
Is this your handwriting?
That's my handwriting.
And this is your daybook where you're scribbling notes?
Yes.
Are they contemporaneous notes as you find things out, or is this document prepared later?
No, these are notes that, so if I'm taking a call or an update from someone, I'll be listening to that person or potentially with a phone in my ear, and when I'm taking an update, I would put things down and I could potentially refer to that later, so it's just bullet points effectively as to updates that I'm getting.
Are they an aide-memoire, these notes?
Yeah, you could use them as an aide-memoire, so if I am giving information later on, I may look back to my book and say, yep, that's what I've got.
Thank you. And then at paragraph 23, if we can go back to your inquiry statement, so that's SBPI 00228, and if we can look at paragraph 23. And you say these are notes I must have got from someone, I don't know. So is much of the information in your daybook from different sources?
Could come from a variety of different sources, yes. Potentially something I've been told or something I've read or something I think I need to write that down.
And then it says no source of information and no time. What do you mean by that?
What I could say is I've not written next to that. Sometimes I'll put a name as to, who that information's come from or what officer's telling me that, and sometimes I would put a time and date as to when I'm getting that information. But I've written that down and I don't have a reference for that as to where I've got that information, unfortunately.
So sometimes you might detail the source or the time you receive the information, sometimes you don't.
That's right.
And presumably if I ask you about when you found out information or who from, there might be difficulties for you remembering.
I'll do the best I can to try and identify who's given me that information. If it's marked here, I'll hopefully be able to tell you that.
Thank you. Then you say Nicole is Officer Nicole Short. So when we saw the reference to Nicole in the daybook a moment ago, that'd be to PC Nicole Short.
That's right, yes.
I don't know where that comes from. When I'm writing, sometimes I may jump around, come back to add information about a subject, so no guarantee these notes are in chronological order. Explain what you mean by that.
So if I was getting an update from an officer and they may give me some information and then I speak to someone else and then put further notes, if I go back and speak to that first officer again, I may flip back my page and then write further information that's coming from that officer or source back in there, so it just means it doesn't flow in the order that I'm getting it. So what I'm trying to say is that the daybook that I have may not be exactly as the order I've received that information.
So if the chair is looking at your daybook at a later time, that's something that you can bear in mind?
Yes.
Thank you. When I looked a moment ago at the first daybook, you'll see there we have the typed version. It said Sunday 3rd of May 2015, so that was the date at the top that you'd handwritten. Were all the notes from that date?
Yes.
Now you say in paragraph 190 of your inquiry statement that you were only involved on the 3rd of May. We'll see that on the screen in a moment. Just past, there we are. I had no further involvement in this after 3rd of May 2015. Is that the only day that you were involved?
It's the only day other than preparing a statement or interviews with the park, but in terms of actual involvement in the case, that was the only day.
All right. So in terms of your day books and the notes written in the day books, were they all prepared on the 3rd of May 2015?
That was all on the 3rd of May, yes.
Thank you. Well, let's just go through those very briefly just to see them. We've looked at 1066. If we can look now at PS 1067. And again, it appears to be 2 pages, again, from your daybook. There's no date on that, but I think you've explained these are from the 3rd of May.
That's correct.
Right. And then 1068. PS 01068, here we are. And again, 2 pages, it says Colette Bell at the top left. We see, for example, on the left-hand side, a timing, 10:45. What does that say?
That's at the time I was making those notes.
Right. And can you read that writing?
Yes, I can read that.
Yeah. And what does it say?
It says 10:45 dash, and then it says chunk, and then it says death message dash DC Parker, and then the line below it says tell Colette blackmail dead.
Thank you. And on the next page, on the right-hand side, we see the name at the top, Martin Dick. What does
Yes.
it say under that? PC,
PC Bryson and PC Murphy.
thank you. And then Locus, we see redacted Dick and McLeod's home address, and then some other things underneath that.
That's right.
And then the name Zaid Sahid.
Yes,
And then it says actions, Zaid Sahid, Martin Dick.
yes,
And were those names of 2 possible witnesses that
yes.
you'd become aware of? Again, we don't see any timings on the right-hand side, but again, that would have been the 3rd of May.
That's correct.
Then if we could look at 1069, another 2 pages from your daybook on the 3rd of May. And this time we can see on the left-hand side, the names at the top are Kirsty McLeod and Martin Dick.
Yes,
And then we also see halfway down Ashley Wise.
yes.
Do you remember what you were aware of in relation to Ashley Wise?
I think that was another witness that we were looking to try and action to go out and speak to.
Thank you. What's the wording to the right of the name Ashley Wise?
That's Lothian's officers.
Right. Was that the officers you were sending to trace Ashley Wise?
Yes, I believe it would be, yes.
So from a different area.
That's correct.
And then if we can look at PS 01070. Again, another 2 pages from your daybook on the 3rd of May. And we see here the name at the top is Caddy Johnson.
Yes,
Can you see that?
Yes.
Obviously my copy on the screen is redacted, but you'll have the copy with your writing there. And then underneath it says...
the copy I've got is redacted as well.
Is it?
Yes,
Next of kin sister,
yes,
and then 1510 hours.
that's
Do
correct.
you remember what that was in connection with?
That was at the time that I was being asked to then pass the subsequent message to the family as opposed to Colette.
Right, we'll come back to that. And then underneath that it says 10 p.m. at her home.
At her house, I think
At her
it is.
house, sorry. And what does it say after that?
It looks like drinking at that time, Zahid Said left before, potentially.
Right. And then it says FLO,
Flow contact.
flow contact. Do you remember what that was a reference to?
That was reference to they were looking to get flows deployed to the family.
Right.
And then they were to be told that there would be flow contact.
And we've heard that FLO is family liaison officers.
That's correct, yes.
And then underneath that, Can you read the time there of the next entry that you've got?
It's actually just cut off on the printed version here as well. Statement to family provided to DC Mitchell.
And when it says statement to family provided to DC Mitchell, we have heard evidence that DC Mitchell attended at the Johnson's house in the afternoon to deliver a death message. And would that be the type of thing that you were noting in your daybook?
That was the time that I believe contacted DC Mitchell to tell him what it was that we're looking to pass.
And can you read what that time is?
It's just cut off. I think it's 16:10 hours.
Thank you. And then can we look at PS 01071? And on the left-hand side of this page of the daybook, it's Saeed Sahid. And was this in connection with, we've heard Mr. Saeed is, or was a friend of Mr. Bio and had contact with the police on the 3rd of May.
That's right, yes.
So are these notes in relation to him?
Yes.
And then on the right-hand side, it appears to say 14:35 hours. And can you tell us what's written there?
Alistair Lewis, John Clerkin.
Who are they?
I actually don't know.
Could they be from Perk?
Possibly.
Right. And then you have a number of, it would appear, officers listed on the right-hand column.
That's right, yes.
That doesn't appear to be lined. Is that something separate from the daybook?
That was a piece of paper that I got on the day, and when I was speaking to officers who effectively didn't know who, a majority of them didn't know who they were, asked them to write their name, shoulder number, where they worked, and a telephone number, just so I knew who the people were that I was working with that day.
And were these officers who'd been drafted into Kirkcaldy from other areas?
That's right,
to
yes.
assist?
Yes.
And they included John McGregor,
Yes.
Simon Telford,
Yes.
and a number of other officers, including an Alan Monteith and a David Bellingham.
That's correct.
Thank you. And then can we finally look at PS 01072? This is the final page from your daybook. And on the left-hand side it says Sister, NOK, next of kin, Caddy Johnson. And then on the right-hand side it's redacted. It says Tuesday, 5th May 2015.
That's right.
And was that what happened to the 4th of May?
I've not included it that day in my daybook.
And can you explain why?
No, I was on duty that day. There's no particular reason for it.
All right, thank you. Can we go back to your inquiry statement, please? I'd like to look at paragraph 22, please. Thank you. And this relates back to I think it says their notebook, but these are your daybook entries.
Yes, that's in my daybook, apologies.
Thank you. Not at all. And it's from the Sunday, the 3rd of May, and it says Tomlinson baton to head. So is that something that you were made aware of on the 3rd of May?
That must have been information I've been told at some point for me to put that down there.
And we've heard evidence that PC Tomlinson had used his baton and struck Mr. Bio on the head. Would that be the information you'd been given?
That's the information that I've recorded at that point, yes.
Do you remember who gave you that information?
I'm really sorry, I don't know.
Do you remember when on the 3rd of May you were aware of that?
Well, that's the first thing I've written in the book. Now, I know I've said that it doesn't go in chronological order, but generally it will do. So that's probably one of the first things. In fact, that would have been the first thing I've been told about that incident.
Did you have your daybook with you when you first arrived?
Yeah, because when I left Leavemouth, I grabbed it and took it with me.
So at a reasonably early stage on the Sunday, the 3rd of May, although we don't have an exact timing.
We don't have an exact timing, no.
Can we look at paragraph 23, which we see at the bottom there? We've already covered that. You've explained the position on the chronological order. And then if we could look at paragraph 29. And we see there, again, it mentions notebook, but I think we're talking about entries in the daybook.
That's correct.
And it mentions Kirsty MacLeod. And if we could just move down that page slightly. Yes. And it says there, paranoid, thinks ? Speak about him, seems unusual, thinks MDMA, seen him take it before, fell out and leaves. What were your notes in connection with that we see transcribed there?
I believe that's updates I've got from officers who would have been speaking to Kirsty MacLeod. So that may have been a call that I've taken from officers who are telling me what she's effectively saying, and that's some of the small points I've noted when I'm getting those updates.
So at that point, you're being advised that someone thinks there was maybe MDMA involved. We've heard that that's another name for ecstasy. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Thank you. Let's go back, please, to PERC 00136. And this was your first operational statement. And this was the one that you wrote yourself on the 4th of May 2015 at 11 in the morning. And you've got your copy in front of you.
Yes.
And if we can look at page 1, and if we can look at paragraphs 2 and 3, you say here that about 7:40 hours on the 3rd of May, I was made aware of a serious incident in the Kirkcaldy area. It was requested that I attend Kirkcaldy Police Station to assist in the initial investigation, and I arranged for other P Division staff to attend at Kirkcaldy Police Station to assist in the initial inquiry. Was this your first involvement on the 3rd of May?
Yes.
What time did you arrive at Kirkcaldy that day?
I don't have an accurate time, but it's maybe by the time I got my things together, just after 8 AM.
Just after 8. When you arrived at Kirkcaldy, who was there? Do you remember the names of any of the officers?
In terms of officers that were involved in
the investigation in relation to these events?
I was almost certain I was one of the first there, and then officers come along, other officers from Leavenmouth and then Glenothes, so it would have been, for example, DC Mitchell, DC Clayton, DC Parker. They arrived not long after.
Right. And can I look at paragraph 38 of your inquiry statement, please? And you say there, here, nobody explained the role of PERC. Sorry, I didn't have a full understanding of this. Nobody explained the role of PERC or Crown Office in the investigation. Crown Office investigate the death. And we act on behalf of Crown Office. I never seen any involvement with any fiscals. I can't remember speaking to PERC on the day either. Normally, there are circumstances when SIOs would be in contact with fiscals to make them aware of deaths. As DS, I wouldn't do that unless specifically asked to. And can you explain whether you were given an explanation on the day when you arrived as to who was going to be involved in the investigation?
When I first arrived,
Yes.
nobody explained, or nobody spoke about other agencies coming at that point. That was slightly later on when I was updated that PERC would become involved in this, and they would be involved in effectively taking on the investigation.
Who, when you first arrived, who was in charge?
In charge of myself and the detectives that were there.
Yes.
Colin Robson would have been my line manager and the person that I'd be speaking to and reporting to.
What was his role that day?
He was the duty senior investigating officer for the division at that time, so he would have been responsible effectively for incidents that occurred over the course of that weekend.
And when you say responsible, what does that mean to someone who's not a member of the police service?
So for me, that's someone that's got takes ownership and control of an investigation effectively and identifies, what is required to effectively deal with what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the person that would take control of this incident.
We've heard other evidence that you and Robson worked closely together that day, is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that, yes, we did.
Are you able to give us a little bit more detail and explain how his role and your roles differed?
D.I. Robson for me was the person who was dealing with the senior management who'd been called out for this incident. He was trying to deal with a number of different sergeants who were on, so Colin was getting a lot of people feeding into him. And I was one of those people, and for me, I was an officer who was taking on certain strands of the inquiry effectively on behalf of that SIO. So I'm trying to relieve some of the pressure on Colin, to be fair, because there's a lot happening at that time, and I'm trying to take on part of that work. So we would work closely together. We weren't sitting next to each other all day at all, but we would speak when we could throughout the course of the day.
And when you say when we could, how would you speak to each other?
If we were in the office, it would be face to face, or I would phone him if he was with other people or if he was out of the office. So although we did work closely, I didn't spend the day with him effectively. We were points when we were separate.
Were you both based in Kirkcaldy Police Office that day?
I was based for the whole day in what was the detective constable's room, so I was based in there the full day.
And how much time did Robson spend in that room?
I couldn't actually give an accurate answer to that, because he was going between different people and taking different calls and going to different meetings. So he was there for me when I needed him, but he was obviously very busy with what was happening.
So can we look at paragraph 35, please? This is your inquiry statement. And you say here, I only had contact with 2 senior officers, very brief contact with Gary McEwen, referred to in my perk statement, and Pat Campbell gave me a note with a form of words. I never had any other contact with senior management. I would say Colin Robson would form part of senior management, the upper chain. I would call myself a first-line manager. I'm a sergeant. You're involved on facilitating what happens and feed into management, but I wouldn't say I was involved in making significant decisions on that day. And again, just so that people can start to understand your role, you've talked about you being a first-line manager. What does that actually mean?
So for the rank structure for the police, constable, sergeant, inspector, chief inspector, superintendent, chief superintendent, and then the senior ranks of the service. So effectively the constables would report to myself, and I would report to the inspector, and as it goes further up the line. People can report direct from constable level to inspector level, but on that day I was trying to collate information to get that to them from the witnesses that I was speaking to.
And you've said already that in terms of the hierarchy, you would be sharing information with D.I. Robson.
Yes.
And you've talked about the senior management upper chain. Talk to me about that. If Robson is part of the senior management, the upper chain, what does that mean?
I describe that as, really for inspector for me is middle management, the upper level is your superintendent levels and above, so the senior management that were there on the day.
Do you remember who the senior management were on that particular day, the 3rd of May 2015?
I clearly know Gary McEwen and Pat Campbell because I've mentioned them both there in my statement, and I know that they were not, I don't think, on duty. I'm pretty sure they were called out because of this incident. So I'm unsure who was the duty officer that was on that day that would have been on duty.
We may hear that Pat Campbell was the duty officer that day. He was a detective superintendent.
That's right.
So in terms of the hierarchy of management, if we start with you, you've told us that you would feed into D.I. Robson.
Yes.
And then what would D.I. Robson's role be in terms of feeding it up to the upper chain?
He would effectively speak to him and brief the senior managers of the information that we're getting as the investigation develops. So if he's getting, I'm feeding in and other people feeding into him, my understanding would be, an expectation would be, is that would be then shared.
And would that be shared with Pat Campbell and Gary McEwen?
Certainly Superintendent Pat Campbell, because he was the detective super and was there earlier in the day. And in terms of Gary McEwen, I generally don't know what his involvement was or when that started.
In terms of when you arrived at Kirkcaldy, did people explain their individual roles in the investigation?
I didn't sit down with any of the senior managers and for them to say, I'm doing this, you're doing that. However, because I've worked with Colin previously, I wouldn't, Colin Robson, apologies.
No, not at all.
I wouldn't expect him to do that because we know and you understand, you know, the working relationship and what would be happening.
So you, from previous experience, knew that Detective Inspector Colin Robson would be your senior officer?
Yes.
Right. Did you need to know, in the role that you were performing that day, did you need to know who the more senior officers were to Colin Robson?
I don't think I needed to know, but I did know because ultimately I did have contact with Mr Campbell later on in the day, along with Gary McEwen. You know, if I needed to speak to those managers, I know where I could have went to find them if I couldn't get Colin.
So you didn't have any confusion in your mind about who anyone was or what their role was?
No, it was clear to me. You know, there was a structure in place there.
Can I ask you to look at PERC 00136, please? Now, this is your statement from the 4th of May 2015. And if we could look at page 2, paragraph 1. Excuse me. I was looking for this updated on attendance by D.I. Robson. Sorry, I think I've maybe got a typo in my notes. What I wanted to ask you about was, as I understand it, you were updated on attendance. Sorry, it's at the bottom of page 1 and goes on to the top of page 2. So it says, on attendance, I was updated by duty SIO D.I. Robson. At that time, it was confirmed that a male had been seen in the area of Henry Road, Hayfield Road, Kirkcaldy, in possession of a knife. I was informed that during contact with the police, the male was unresponsive. Do you remember when you were updated by D.I. Robson?
I think that was during the initial phone call that he gave me to try and get the officers through to Kirkcaldy and get myself through there. I think that was quite early on.
So where it says here, on attendance I was updated, at the bottom of page 1, is that incorrect, or is your memory different now?
I can't say that for certain. I remember getting the phone call from him and saying, get to Kirkcaldy, and I think at that time he did give me an initial update as to what's taking place. Now, I may have had that by the phone call to start with, and then a further update when I got to Kirkcaldy, but if I'm right in saying when I got to Kirkcaldy, I don't think D.I. Robson was there at that point.
Where was D.I. Robson?
He had, I believe, he had been out to the scene.
So when you arrived at Kirkcaldy, you've told us it was just after 8. D.I. Robson wasn't in Kirkcaldy Police Office at that time?
No, I don't remember him being there at that time.
So the reason you knew he was in charge was because had it been Robson that called you prior to that?
It was Colin Robson that had called me, and also when you're working the weekend, you know who the detective inspector is that's on duty. So I knew that he would be the person that would be in charge.
How long after you arrived did D.I. Robson come back to Kirkcaldy Police Office?
I don't know that.
Is there a difference between an update and a briefing? You talk there about being updated by Robson. Is there a difference between that and being briefed?
No, it's information. It's different words for receiving information.
Right, thank you. Is there a record in one of your daybooks of the update you were given by D.I. Robson?
Not that I could attach specifically to D.I. Robson. There are things in my daybook which may have come from D.I. Robson,
Right.
but I can't say that for certain what's come from where in my daybook.
When did you start completing your daybook? Was it when you received the call or when you arrived at Kirkcaldy?
When I arrived at Kirkcaldy, I believe.
Now, we've heard evidence from DC Parker. You've mentioned DC Wayne Parker.
Yes.
And he had noted in his daybook that at 8:20 that morning, a briefing took place at Kirkcaldy after he'd arrived and after DC Mitchell had arrived and DC Clayton had arrived. Was this a different briefing from the update you'd received from Robson, or was it the same thing?
I don't know.
You don't
Did Wayne say who gave the briefing at that time?
Yes, he says it was either you or Robson.
Okay.
Well, let me just give you a note of what he says. In his notebook he said, 08:20, attended at Kirkcaldy for briefing. In his inquiry statement, he said at paragraph 51 that either Robson or Dursley gave the briefing. At paragraph 52, he said that you gave the briefing. And in his perk statement, he'd said, I'm not 100% sure, but I think D.I. Robson gave the briefing. And I'm wondering if you can help us find out who actually gave that briefing.
I'm sorry, but I actually can't.
Right.
I can't say for certain who that would be.
If you and D.I. Robson had been in a room giving a briefing to other officers, who is more likely to have given a briefing? Does it depend on rank or role or any of those things?
It depends on who's got probably the most information. And actually, if you're given a briefing and someone's got information and someone else has got, two people could put into that as well.
So who had more information at 8:20 on the 3rd of May 2015?
D.I. Robson.
Can we look please at your inquiry statement again, paragraph 34. You talk here about arriving at the police station, that'll be Kirkcaldy Police Office, and the initial SIO in charge was Colin Robson. I knew he was in charge because he was the weekend SIO, and I knew that already. He contacted me to say there was an incident and to gather staff to head to Kirkcaldy. He was my point of contact throughout the day. However, I know as the day progressed, CID in uniform attended, who I suspected would have taken overall control. You use the phrase there, point of contact. Does that have a special meaning?
No.
So what does it mean?
He's the person I would report to.
And who were the CID and uniform that you talk about there?
What I'm saying there is, I'm aware that both the CID and uniform had attended the initial call, so the officers that had been dispatched to the scene. And what I'm saying is that both there were CID officers and uniform officers attended that incident.
Right. Let me just go over that. So Robson, was my point of contact throughout the day.
Yep.
I know as the day progressed, CID and uniform attended. Are you talking about them attending Hayfield Road?
I'd like to know what the question was for that to be my answer.
Do you want to see the previous paragraph? You're being asked about your role on the 3rd of May 2015. It starts at paragraph 33. And you talk about being a detective sergeant at Leavenmouth CID and being asked to go to Kirkcaldy. Nobody comes in and says, this is your role for the investigation. I was just helping with initial oversight. And then paragraph 34, you talk about arriving at the police station. Robson was in charge. He was the weekend SIO. And you say he was the point of contact throughout the day. But I know as the day progressed, CID and uniform attended, who I suspected would have taken overall control.
Ultimately, what I'm trying to say there is both CID and uniform were involved in this response, and ultimately, my belief is that the CID would then, as the day progressed, would take overall control of this investigation.
Right. So you were Detective Sergeant at Leavenmouth CID.
That's correct.
So when you say CID would have taken overall control, who were you thinking of? You were in the CID.
CID as in for Police Scotland, effectively. You know.
And who would have had that responsibility?
Well, that would then go to the senior investigating officer, which would have been initially Colin, but then at some point, I assume Superintendent Campbell was then taking control.
So the initial SIO is Robson, but then at some point, maybe someone more senior like Pat Campbell would have taken on.
My understanding is that's how that would work, yes.
Right. And you talk about uniform attended. We saw in one of your daybooks the sheet of paper with different officers' names on it, and you told us you'd asked them all to give their details. Is that the people? Were they uniform officers?
No, they were detectives from different areas.
Now, in your daybook, you said those were from different areas.
Yes.
When it says they're uniform attended, are you thinking of someone else?
I'm just thinking in general there were uniformed officers who were involved in this police investigation, involved in locus protection, involved in a variety of different jobs. So it was joint effectively between both CID and uniform response.
Right. And you were part of that mix of officers from different areas carrying out the investigation on the 3rd of May?
Yes.
So was it clear to you on the morning of the 3rd of May who was in overall control, other than you obviously have told us about D.I. Robson, but were you aware of the others who were involved in the morning?
No, I wasn't. I didn't take any part in that at all.
And as the day progressed, was it clear to you who was in overall control of the situation?
Well, it was clear there was senior management had come out. Now, although I had very limited contact with them that day, I know that Colin would have been reporting into that management team. So for me, the management team, once they arrived, effectively then they're in control from that point, from my point of view.
Right. I want to ask you about the briefing at 8:20. DC Parker has noted the briefing in his notebook as having taken place at 8:20. This is the one where I asked you, was it you or D.I. Robson? And I'm interested, if you think back now, What were you told about the circumstances of the incident at Hayfield Road at that time in the morning?
I couldn't say for certain what I was told at that point. I've got some notes in my book, which is at the start of my day. So my expectation is that that's the type of information that I got from that briefing at that point.
Do you want to have a look? Feel free to look at your hard copies of your daybook.
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in whether at that time in the morning anyone had shared information with you about calls having been received from members of the public.
So, sorry, could you repeat that?
I'm interested in any information that you were given at or around 8:20 in the morning or early in the morning on the Sunday, the 3rd of May. What information, if any, had you been given about calls had been received from members of the public? We've heard evidence that there were 999 calls and calls from the public talking about a black male near that area in Kirkcaldy with a knife. I'm just wondering if you had information about that.
Well, looking at my daybook there, I've got here at 0825, all calls to police, request for download. I've got CC-743, linked call card. So these are things that I've scribbled down.
I'd like to see on the screen the page that you're referring
Okay.
to. So does it have a number at the top of that? I know you've taken it out of the...
It's 01066.
Right, thank
So
you.
it's the first page of my daybook.
The first page. Let's go back to that first page. And which part are you reading from? Do you see on the screen? Can you point to the area? So you're pointing to the left-hand side. That's fine. And that's 0825 hours. And are these notes that you took at that time?
That's notes that I've been writing down at that point.
And that says all calls to police.
Yes.
And what does it say underneath there?
It looks like Scott request for download.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Right. This is your handwriting, though.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Thinking back now.
Potentially requesting downloads of the calls.
All right.
Potentially so we could hear them. Could be for that.
So you hadn't heard those calls, but you were made aware that there had been calls.
Yes.
And were you aware that that was from members of the public that morning?
Yes.
And what were you aware of at that time in terms of the actions or behaviour of Mr. Bio?
I would have read the call cards or reviewed the call cards that have come in to try and pick up information from those call cards.
When would you have done that?
Round about this time to try and information gather and try and establish, what we actually got here, what's happened.
And was that something you would have done before the 8:20 or 8:25 that we see noted here?
It would have been done just around that because it's natural for, it's one of the first things you would do when you're trying to get an update on an incident. Right, where's the call card, what's the circumstances and what's there.
So you had access to that?
Yeah, it would either have been on a Storm call card if I was logged on, or if there was a printed version, I don't know.
When you arrived at Kirkcaldy, did you have access to a computer to allow you to log on?
Yes, I did. I logged in at one of the terminals that was in at the station.
In the room that you've talked about. So any information that was on the call cards prior to 8:25, would you have had access to that?
Yes.
On that basis, you would have known that calls were coming in about a man with a knife.
Yes.
And were you aware of the actions of the police in response at Hayfield Road?
I'm not aware of what individual officers done or how that progressed, but I've clearly been given an update because I've written something in my book which suggests there has been contact with the police. And
what was it in your book that you've noted contact with the police? Where do we see that?
That's where it's got short dash Peyton, and then
Sorry, could you give us a moment just to, right. All right, so left-hand side,
Yes.
3/4 of the way down, short Peyton Walker went for Nicole.
that's correct.
And Tomlinson baton to head.
Yes,
So is that your notes about the circumstances?
that's notes that I've written down there. That's obviously what I'm picking out and written down as of.
And that's the name of 3 of the officers that we've heard were at the scene at Hayfield Road.
Yes,
And Tomlinson
Yes.
as well, so 4. Now, in your PERC statement, 136, and we don't need to go to that straight away, but at page 2 you say, I was informed that during contact with the police the male was unresponsive. So again, at that time in the morning was part of the briefing information that by then the male had become unresponsive at the scene.
that's correct.
You knew about that at that time?
Yes.
And was there any suggestion at that time that police were looking for two guys, 2 men?
No.
Was there discussion or a suggestion at that time that you were looking for witness statements from any men?
I don't remember a specific discussion about witness statements at that point.
Right.
No.
So can I say that on the left-hand side, the notes you've referred to, are those the notes that you would have prepared roughly around the time of the briefing?
Yeah, that would certainly fall into that order.
If you had been delivering the briefing at that time of day, would you have expected to see more notes in your day book?
It varies. Sometimes you record more, sometimes you don't. That's all I've recorded in that day. Looking at that, that's information I'm receiving and writing down, which would probably tend to suggest that I was being briefed. However, I don't want to say that for certain because I don't know that. I may have picked that up by telephone and then subsequently briefed those officers.
Okay, thank you. And then we see on the left-hand side, 0904, does that mean life pronounced extinct?
That's correct, yes.
So is that the time that you noted that Mr. Bio had been pronounced deceased?
That will either be the time that I was told or that will be the time that he's been pronounced life extinct. I don't know for certain which it is.
All right, thank you. So after this briefing at 20 past or 25 past 8, how long do briefings normally last?
It depends what you're briefing about.
Do you remember how long this one lasted?
No.
So after this briefing, tell us what tasks you carried out.
It's from there you're trying to build up a picture of what's happened. You know, we need to try and identify witnesses, who's called the police, who's reported things. You need to try and identify, most importantly, who Mr. Bayou was. You know, we didn't know that at that stage, so that was the priority at that stage for me.
And what tasks do you remember allocating to any of the officers who were under your management?
Round about this time, there was the linked call card that come in where Mr. Bayou's partner had called in reporting concerns for him. So what I do remember was thinking this could be linked and this needs to be actioned quickly.
And on the right-hand side of this page, do we see the name at the top is Colette Bell?
That's correct, yes.
We've heard that she's was the partner of Mr. Bio. Tell us what you've written there.
I've got Colette Bell at the top, and then I've got a line to, it looks like girlfriend, last seen, and then there's some points that are redacted, and then I've got unsure time underscored, then Zahid underscored, and then it looks like seed, which I think is just the way I've written it on the day, and then in brackets spoke to him, dash, and it looks like racist, close brackets. And then underneath at boxing, back door open, house, trashed, I think that is. And then it says last, then a gap, light blue jeans, stroke, navy blue hoodie top.
So the notes that we see on the top right-hand side of this first page of your daybook, tell us about when you made those notes.
I'm almost certain that those are notes that I'm getting when I'm on the phone to either it'll be Wayne or Andy.
What time was this?
I'm sorry, I don't have a time recording on that.
Where were Wayne Parker and Andy Mitchell when they gave you this information?
I believe they would have been out at the home address.
And when you say the home address, would that be the home address of Colette Bell?
That's correct, yes.
Now, we've heard other evidence that Colette Bell phoned the police that morning at 8:36 hours. And we've heard the audio of that call, and she asked for the police to come. And then we've also heard evidence from DC Mitchell and DC Parker that they then were tasked by you to go to the house of Colette Bell. Would that be correct?
Yes.
So this would be sometime after 8:36 that you made these notes.
Yeah. Yes.
And we've also heard from Parker and Mitchell in evidence that there was the call to you back in Kirkcaldy Police Office after they'd met up with Colette Bell, which would tie in with what you've just said.
Yes.
Thank you. And can I ask you about this reference here to Zaid Saheed? Speak to him, and it says racist. And I know you were asked about this in your inquiry statement. Can you explain what you mean by that?
No. I don't know. I don't know what that means. I've looked at that and obviously spoke about it through the statement. But I don't know if we probed it any further or asked what was meant by that, or I don't know if that was then included in any subsequent interviews we had with the witnesses, if it's been covered by them. But I don't know what is meant by that.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment.
Okay.
Or maybe not in a moment, but at some point. Now, the other thing that DC Mitchell mentioned to us about when he arrived at Kirkcaldy was he described things as being in a bit of a muddle when they arrived. Would you agree with that description, that things were in a bit of a muddle?
In relation to?
The scene at Kirkcaldy when he arrived after 8 in the morning, that it was a bit of a muddle.
I wouldn't describe it as a muddle. What I would describe it as is early days in any significant inquiry are hard, they're stressful, muddle's not the word I would use. I think is the best way to describe that.
Well, you've said it's hard and stressful.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And in what way is it hard when an inquiry is coming together at the beginning?
Yeah, because it's just information overload. You're trying to get so many things done, and you're trying to do so many things. Sometimes it might give that impression is that, but you are trying to get the best job done as not as quickly as you can, but as well as you can at that point.
All right. Now, I'm going to move on, but I understand that in terms of the transcript, there may be an ability now to get that started if we have a short break now, if that's possible.
Break now then.
Thank you.
Ms Graeme.
Thank you. Can we go back to your inquiry statement, please? And I'd like to ask you about paragraph 50. And you've said here, I wasn't aware a firearms post-incident procedures SOP was used at Kirkcaldy, and that's standard operating procedure. I now have a leaflet for post-incident management in deaths in custody cases that is good. I've got it in my handy books. It gives advice who to call, implementation, deploying a post-incident manager, conferring reminder and establishing facts in those circumstances. If that happened today, I would know where to look and what is to be done. Should there be a death in custody or a serious injury in custody, this is what to do. I don't know when it was published and if it was available in May 2015. I've never needed to adapt an SOP or go to something similar if there aren't procedures that fit. So this is something that you have available now.
Yes.
And you're finding that extremely helpful by the sounds of your statement.
Yes.
And you've said that now you have advice available to you in your handy books. What are handy books?
Basically, when things get sent out, you know, I'll look at them and review them, and I think that would be great for me if I'm night shift and I'm getting asked about a situation. So I've printed it off and I've got a big file of things that I would go to that I would quickly look at as a reference to help me in an instant.
Right. So that you've got that now. Did you have something like that in 2015?
No, I didn't.
No. And so you've said that it gives you advice about who to call, implementation, deploying a post-incident manager, conferring reminder and establishing facts in those circumstances. Can you just explain to us in a little bit more detail what those things are that you've listed? This is the advice that you get now from the information you have. Okay,
so that would be for if there's a death or serious injury in relation to someone that's been in police custody. So it's effectively, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's an A4 bit of paper, two-sided, and it's about in relation to contacting effectively the superintendent of professional standards, who would then raise that to executive level, I believe, of Police Scotland, who make the decision round about deployment of a post-incident manager, and having the staff involved in any incident in relation to the death. So I think they're called key police witnesses. They would be taken to a particular location and effectively given a form of words, which is a conferring reminder. I've called it here. I took that from the handy document that I had, and yeah, effectively you would go through that process.
And this leaflet, the A4 sheet, double-sided, that you have now, that's a helpful checklist of things that you should be doing.
Yes.
And you've mentioned that one of the things is involve the superintendent from the Professional Standards Department.
Yes.
And in 2015, you said you didn't have anything like that. How did you know what to do?
On this incident?
In 2015, in May 2015.
To be fair, those decisions would have been made for me, inspecting ranks and above. So at that point I was the sergeant, so I'm involved in the initial responses, but for, you know, contacting the on-duty superintendent for professional standards and things like that, that would have been done by potentially D.I. Robson or one of the other senior managers.
Right. So these jobs here, who to call, deploying a post-incident manager, conferring reminder, these would have been the responsibility of D.I. Robson or somebody more senior to D.I. Robson?
Yes, yes. So if this was to happen, or something was to happen tomorrow, that would be off that rank that would take control of that.
And would that be because Robson was a DI or because Robson was a duty SIO?
Well, he was the senior investigating officer at that time, so he, alongside whoever else was involved, would have considered this at this stage.
And so today, you've told us you're now an inspector,
Yes.
and you've got this leaflet in your handy books.
Yeah.
Are these the things that if you were faced with a death in custody, are these things that you would do because of your rank as inspector or because you would be the SIO?
That's the SIO is the rank of inspector. So that is effectively what I've got. So hopefully it never happens, but that's there, that if it did happen, at least I know, right, I've got it. You're not going on to computers to try and find it. It's there.
You're ready to take the steps
Yes.
that have to be made.
Yes.
But when you were Detective Sergeant on the 3rd of May 2015, that was not something that you had to do as part of your role and not something you had, the leaflet you didn't have.
That wasn't anything I was involved in on that day.
Right. And you've said in paragraph 50 that you weren't aware of firearms post-incident procedures, SOP. You weren't aware that that was used at Kirkcaldy.
No.
Did you have a clear understanding at that time what procedures were in place on the 3rd of May for investigating the death of this man? You're talking here about firearms post-incident procedures. So in terms of post-incident procedures, on the 3rd of May 2015, a man has died
Yes.
in Hayfield Road. There's been contact with the police.
Yes.
Did you have a clear view at that time, a clear understanding of what procedures would be adopted on that day?
The truth is no, because I was responding to the death like you would for any person and almost go into, let's go and get this done. But then I didn't have a good awareness, to be honest, at the park at the time. So when I heard the park were going to be getting involved, I feel like I should have known that, but I didn't know that at the time. And you start saying, park, all right, okay. So there was a bit of me on that day when that first was introduced. I just think and say, right, okay. So this is not just Graeme Dursley helping to try and investigate this. There's going to be different aspects to this.
I think in paragraph 36 of your statement, if we can just go back to that, you do say in your statement to the chair, we can go back to 36, that, to be honest, I knew very little about the perk. I remember it getting mentioned to me, perk were going to be involved. I remember thinking, who were perk? I should have known that, but the reality is I didn't. And we'll no doubt hear more about perk, but I think they'd come into being, if you like, on the 1st of April 2013.
That's correct.
But you didn't have a clear picture of their role.
I didn't have a good working knowledge of what their responsibilities were in general prior to this incident.
Would it have helped you, looking back now, would it have helped you to have a clearer understanding of the procedures that were to be adopted and who the people like Perk, who the people were that were going to be involved?
Yes.
And how would that have made a difference to your job?
I think it just would have helped on the day, knowing, well, let's say right at the start of the day, I'm thinking, right, let's go and let's get these things done. But then Perk's mentioning, I'm starting to think, well, when do they come in? What do they do? What's their responsibilities? So it's just a bit confusion where, for me now, Perk would be contacted and they would be involved straight from off and you'd be looking to either work jointly or for them to take full control straight from the off.
What's changed now for you in terms of understanding who Perk are and understanding what their involvement would be in an incident?
I've had an input from the Perk at an investigator's course I was on, where they come in and explain things, and there was also the document that I mentioned there in relation to deploying post-incident managers makes reference to the Perk as well, so that did help.
And that's obviously on an investigator's course.
Yes.
Are you aware from your own experience when you were a detective sergeant what information was available to sergeants or what information is available to sergeants now about the role of Perk?
People that are going the detective sergeant's course, I'm almost certain we'll get an input from the PERC as well. So that will be included in the training. And I'd be really surprised if it's not included at all training.
For constables as well?
For constables, I expect there'd be an input for constables for awareness of the PERC as well.
So that there's more awareness generally
Yes.
about PERC now?
Yes.
In 2015, in May of 2015, whose responsibility would it have been to share information with you, both about PERC but also about post-incident procedures, and to bring you up to speed, if you like?
So are you speaking in general, or are you, on that day, are you speaking
I'm
specifically?
speaking about the 3rd of May.
On that day,
Yeah.
it was D.I. Robson that informed me and told me that the PERC were going to be involved.
And in terms of bringing you up to speed on post-incident procedures and how things were going to be managed, who would have been responsible for bringing you up to speed on that information?
I didn't get generally brought up to speed in relation to the post-incident procedures and the officers that were involved in the contact.
Sorry, did you say did or didn't?
No, I didn't, because
You weren't?
I wasn't, that was not an area that I was looking at that day.
Right. Would it have, looking back now, would it have helped you to have had a briefing about what was going on generally in terms of managing the incident?
Managing the staff, the police officers, you mean?
Yes, managing the staff,
Yeah.
managing the investigation.
Yes, it would be good to get that, but, you know, I am getting updates as the day goes, you know, so there is information getting shared with me. And it's obviously very fast-paced throughout the day as well.
In terms of post-incident procedures, post-incident management, what briefings were given to you that day?
I never spoke at all about the post-incident procedures or the management of that staff. I don't remember being involved in any of those discussions or decisions.
We've talked about you identifying priority actions, and I'm interested to know in how you went about identifying priority actions for that day.
Try and identify witnesses. Try and identify who Mr. B was. That was the priority. That was the most important thing right at the start, was for identification of Mr. Bayou. Identifying who has seen what, who could tell us what's taken place, what may have happened at that scene, what's happened beforehand and what's happened afterwards. So it's trying to capture as much information as you can to try and fill in the gaps or fill in the timeline.
So in terms of trying to prioritise individual tasks for the officers who you were managing, how did you go about prioritising individual tasks for individual officers?
I remember we had a set number, you know, of actions we were to get. We were getting staff I've never met before, so effectively it was, right, we need to get that done, and I met these officers who I'd never met before, and it was like, right, this is what we need to get done, and that was later in the day actually, sorry, that we put those officers out. But the priority action right at the start was to go and speak to Colette, because that was the information, the potential link CORCAP.
Was that the number one priority for you?
At that point, because that may then have linked and helped identify who Mr. Bay was.
Right. And you've described there later in the day having a set number of actions, and you were gesturing, it looked like you were maybe looking at a document. Did you have a list of actions?
I'm actually just wanting to flick through my book here, because I don't know if I've got an actual set list. I've got written at various points here, I've got actions, which is written on 101067, actions.
Let's get that up on the screen then. So it's 6, 7. Here we are. So on the right-hand side there, we see the word actions.
Yeah. And then
And what do we see written there then?
you've got 6 DCs dash Lothians and then 2 East Mit. So that's clearly me at that point saying, right, I've got actions, what staff am I getting to try and carry out these actions, and that's the staff I was due to be getting.
And where do we see the actual actions?
I don't think they're listed, but in the next page,
So
you've
that would
got
be 6, 7.
01068.
Right,
I have got on the right-hand side,
yes.
I have got
You've got actions towards the bottom
I've got
there.
actions also almost in the middle of the page. Actions, Zahid Said and Martin Dick.
Right.
And above that, I've got locus and then an arrow with a number of different things written there as well.
Right. And so where it says locus,
Yes.
tell us what you've written there.
So I've got locus with an arrow and it says...
We can see there's a redacted address there for Martin Dick.
A redacted address at the top. So that's my mind, I think, just putting down, right, so what have we got, where has he been as a potential locus for the timeline of his events? So at that point, I must be aware that he's been at Mr Dick, Miss McLeod's address. There is the area where Mr Bayou was coming into contact with the police officers.
Does that say body
Oh,
of
actually,
locus?
yeah, that's right. So that's his body, locus, and then the street. I don't know what that word is next to it, unfortunately. And then you've got H
Could it
stroke
be Henry?
Henry. Could be
So that's
street, it's the area Henry
we've
Road.
heard that's
yes.
an area near
Yeah,
Henry
it's
Road,
next street.
Bayfield Road. And just to go back for a moment, as I understand the situation, we've heard evidence that his body was in the Victoria Hospital.
That's correct.
So that was another area.
Yes.
And then the street, and then what does it say under that?
Street, and then underneath street it says H stroke A, which is a shorthand for home address.
And then we've got the address for Colette Bell.
Yes, and then under that, Zahid Said.
And we've got his home
Yes.
address redacted. And then actions, the 2 names.
Yes.
When did you write this list?
I've got there 11:20 hours for a briefing mit on the left-hand side of the page. So I think that would have been after or around about that time.
Let me just see what you're referring to. I can see 11:40 on the left-hand side. I can see 10:45.
10:45, and if they scroll up that page,
Right.
so it's the bottom left-hand corner.
All right. So it's just at the bottom
So it's
of
just
the
it's
screen.
just off camera.
It's just off this. So we can move that down.
You've got
Yes.
11:20
11:20.
hours brief mit.
And what's that a reference to?
That is when I've went and spoken to the officers that had come from the other area to give them actions.
Do you remember what you said to the officers from MIT?
I can't give you the fine detail of any briefing that was given. It would have been general circumstances of what we've got, and that we're looking to go and try and information gather and speak to these witnesses.
And then on the right-hand page, we see the different items that you've listed.
Yes.
When you mentioned earlier that you had a list of priority actions, is this the list that you had in your mind, or was it something else?
I wouldn't say that. A list of actions is 1 to 10 with clear defined actions. Now, this for me is more a generalisation of things that I'm looking to get done, but it's not a clear list. But I can see from my writing there, you know, action, definitely we need to go and speak to Zahid, we need to go and speak to Mr Dick, we need to go and speak to, did I say Mr Said?
Said, Zahid
Zahid,
and Martin Dick are
yes,
the
so
2 names.
yes, those were clearly key.
So you're saying what's here, it's not a clear list, and you talked about envisaging a list, numbered list.
No.
When you mentioned earlier there were a set number of actions that needed to get done, and you mentioned later in the day, is this what we see here on this daybook? Is that the list that you were thinking about when you told us that?
No,
Was there another list?
no. I don't have a list of, you know, defined actions that I give out to people or anything like that.
Right.
This is, I'll have been given actions out throughout the course of the day. They are general notes of the type of actions I've given, but I don't have a defined list of what I was given to do.
So it's not that we should go and look for a list that you had prepared?
No, I just wanted to check in those notes there whether it was more a defined list, but it's not.
Okay. So what we see here on this screen at the moment, 68, is the priority actions, if you like, that you'd identified. You've given the locus, and you've given a number of, there's 5 there, and then there's 2 names, Said, Sahid and Martin Dick, and they were also actions. We've heard that may have been 2 people you wanted to get witness statements from. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thanks. Now, on paragraph 33 of your inquiry statement, if we can go back to that just for a moment, we've already looked at this briefly when we were looking at your role that day. You say here, I was just helping with initial oversight, and I'm interested in what you mean by initial oversight. What does that mean?
I was helping to try and identify what needed done to try and progress the investigation.
And then at paragraph 16 of your statement, you say, I realised from that day that this would be subject to review. We certainly were looking at the incident as a death in custody or following contact. When we were speaking to these witnesses, we were trying to understand how had he died. That's what everyone would want to know. Could you give us a little bit more information about this paragraph? What do you mean you realised from that day that this would be subject to review?
I knew right from the start, because of the police contact, that, you know, this would be subject to a full investigation to try and establish exactly what's taking place.
When you say review, is that what you mean by a full investigation?
Yeah, it would be effectively reviewing the actions of the police, or what we've got here, an inquiry.
You wouldn't have envisaged a public inquiry at that stage. Who do you think would have been doing the review? Perhaps we're at cross purposes here.
Well, at that time...
Do you see any difference between investigation and review?
So the investigation for me is going out and let's do this. A review is someone come along to say, right, who done what, and was that the right course of action?
Right. And who would that someone be?
Well, the PERC potentially.
Right. But you didn't know much about them at that time?
Not that time, no.
Anyone else that you think would have been carrying out a review?
At that time, I did actually consider this may go to a public inquiry, because I was aware of a public inquiry previously, so that was in the back of my head.
Right. We certainly were looking at the incident as a death in custody or following contact. Explain why that's of significance, was of significance to you at that time.
Because Mr. Bayou was in police custody, or effectively with them. I don't know at what point they got to in that arrest process, but it's really important because, you know, we were there with Mr. Bayou, and it's clearly really important that we deal with that effectively.
And what makes the involvement of the police so important?
Because we're a public service, and we're there for the public, and if there's any death when that involves the police, it's clearly really significant.
And significant to the public
For everyone, yes.
and to the officers?
Yes,
And to the police service?
yes.
And then you say, when we were speaking to these witnesses, we were trying to understand how had he died. That's what everyone would want to know. And was that your own impression, or was that something you were aware that people wanted to know?
Straight from the off, that's what I would want to know. And that's what, personally, I would want to know, but I know that's what everybody would want to know.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really important to know exactly how he died.
And why is that important to everyone?
Because the circumstances need to be known in full to know exactly what's taking place on that day.
Thank you. So when you talked about your role helping with initial oversight, were you primarily focusing on how did Mr. Bio die?
I was focusing on trying to get those initial actions done that would try and capture the evidence that would assist in identifying how he died.
Thank you. And then in paragraph 37 of your inquiry statement, you talk about needing to speak to people, 37, needing to speak to people and get information. We were trying to get PERC to deal with things, but we needed to see people immediately. It's a hard position to be in. Explain what you meant by that.
I remember on the day when it was mentioned about PERC, and I'm thinking, right, okay, someone else is going to come and try and take over. And I remember saying to myself, that's fine, but where are they? When are they going to be here? Because we've got people that need information.
Where were PERC?
I don't know where they're based or where they come from, but I remember thinking on the day, you know, it's great me saying this, but I remember thinking, you know, where are they? Let's get them here. I don't know when they turned up, because I never had any involvement in this day, but it did feel like there was a period of time until they effectively arrived.
And was that of some concern to you? You've mentioned people need information.
Yes.
So when you say people need information, what would you have wanted for yourself and for the officers who you were managing?
I would have wanted to be out with family liaison officers and giving updates to Colette and Mr. Bayo's family sooner than effectively we did.
How soon are you talking about?
There's a fine balance between doing things quickly but doing things accurately. So it's getting that fine balance. But for me, things were delayed on that day, but I think with because of the best intentions for deploying family liaison officers who were separate and things like that. But my feeling is now is we could have done that sooner.
When you say sooner, what do you mean? How soon?
Once we were clearer on what had actually happened at that scene and what the identification of Mr. Bayu and trying to get information to them, I felt like that there were delays because we were effectively, the PERC were involved.
And when do you think you would have had sufficient information to have provided the family of Mr. Bio and his partner with information about his death? When do you feel you would have been sufficiently in possession of enough information to do that?
That's really hard to say because you've also got to decide what you're going to tell them and when you're going to tell them that. Now, at that time, that wasn't a decision for me to make, but you want to be able to give people information as soon as you can. So that's a really hard question to say exactly the right time to do it, but I can understand how people would want to know sooner because I would.
Well, we'll come on to the death messages later and we'll maybe look at this in a little bit more detail. But what do you see as the benefits if the police are able to give information to families at an early stage?
It lets them know what's happened. they're going to have hundreds of questions, and they want to know what's happened to their family member. And the benefits of that is it means they're getting kept up to date and they're getting information.
What impact does sharing information with families have? What positive impacts does it have in terms of the impact on the police?
Well, effectively, if you're sharing information, you're keeping them involved in what's happening, and you're keeping them up to date, and you try and get a relationship between the two parties, effectively.
How can that help the police?
It helps the police try and progress in what's happened in relation to the death. It would help us, yeah.
Thank you. Can we look, please, at paragraph 39? You say, I kept an open mind about the investigation. I don't know what caused the death of Mr. Bio. I wanted to speak to people to find out as much information as I could to understand what happened. It is a hypothesis that criminal police actions may have caused the death, or something that is taken. It is a medical matter, or is there something that happened in the lead up to it that caused it? In the absence of specific information, we don't know what caused it. Explain what you mean here.
When I've got this, or not when I've got it, when this incident's first getting reported, I'm thinking, right, what are well, the words there, hypotheses, but what could have happened? What options are there? What may have caused this? And that's a number of things that, when I was asked during my interview, what was I thinking? And those are ones that I've just, so these are ones that I was thinking about when I got interviewed last year, but these are things that I would have been thinking about in the day, because you've got to be able to appropriately react to that, you've got to try and cover all these bases.
And we may hear other evidence that an SIO will have various hypotheses in mind, and we may also be hearing that an investigation allows you to gather in information to then exclude a hypothesis. But until that point, everything is open.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
I'd like to turn to the visit to Colette Bell's house. We've heard evidence from Andrew Mitchell and DC Wayne Parker about this. And I'd just like to get our bearings on the timings of when this happened on the 3rd of May. I've already mentioned we've heard evidence that Colette Bell phoned the police at 8:36 in the morning. And we've heard evidence that from DC Parker that he was to go to Colette Bell's house for a welfare check. Now, you've mentioned earlier that you thought there might be a connection. Can you explain to us a little about this action that you told Mitchell and Parker to go to Colette Bell's house and the reasons for that?
We've got the linked call card. We're thinking, could this be linked? Miss Bell's reporting concern for her partner. So at that point, I'm saying to DC Parker and Mitchell, let's just go up there, let's go and speak to her, and let's find out what information she's got. What is the concerns, and is this linked? Can we try and say that it's linked, or do we think this is completely separate and not linked at all?
What was it that made you think this could be linked?
I don't know if I was told about the linked call card. I've got linked call card written in one of my books, but effectively...
Do you see it on the reference
Yeah.
there? We'll have that on the screen.
So
is that page 1?
PS 01066, which is the first page of my daybook.
Right. So this is this at an early stage?
Yeah, this is an early stage, so
You see the right-hand page is Colette Bell at the top.
Yes.
Where does it say linked?
So on the left-hand page, you've got C/C-743, linked call card.
What does that mean?
That means that there is a call card. Now, I don't know if it's been, linked on Storm or not, or whether someone's linked to two incidents and thinks these could be the same. You better have a look at that. So I think I've written that down, potentially told that There could be a linked call card, and I would have looked at that call card because I think that was the call card from Miss Bell.
Do you remember what the factors were that made you think this could be linked?
One of the biggest factor was the description of Mr. Baywood, and the fact that the person that she was reporting my concern for was black.
Thank you. We've heard that 3 officers were sent to Colette Bell's home, Parker, Mitchell and Clayton. Can you explain to us why 3 officers were sent?
No particular reason. The 3 of them are there at this point, you know. That was a really important action to go out and do.
We've heard evidence that one of the possibilities was to give Clayton something to do. Do you agree with that, or do you think there was another reason behind sending 3 officers?
I've got 3 detectives there right at the early time. This is a fast-track action. You don't know what's going to lead from that action. So if when they're up at that house something else comes in, if you've got an extra body, you can then try and take care of that as well.
Now, we've heard about priority actions, you've mentioned fast-track actions. Are they the same thing?
That's just a term that I use. It's an action, it's a job, effectively. Go and do something.
And the fact you've referred to it as fast-track, does that mean it gets done sooner than others?
Fast track is a term that I would use from a Holmes inquiry, which is a fast track action is an action that you need to get done quick.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that identifying the man was one of the priorities that you wanted to investigate.
Yes.
And then we've heard from Parker and Mitchell. They arrived at Colette Bell's house about 9 o'clock and waited for her to arrive a short time later. And that when they left Kirkcaldy Police Office, they did not know that Mr. Bio had died, that the man had died. Would you agree that when they left, that wasn't known?
I don't know. I don't know if they knew that or not.
But you've told us already, you were aware that at 9:04 in the morning he'd been pronounced life extinct.
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at Perk 137, please? And I'm thinking on page 2, paragraph 1. And I'm looking at this thinking that's probably not the right one. But I wonder, there might be a slight error here that I want to flesh out with you.
Okay.
So are you on page 2 and we can see, no, I'm on the wrong statement. Sorry, it's 136, not 137 that I'm looking for. Oh. All right, let's look at 136 first of all, which is the one on the screen. Page 2, paragraph 3. You say here, shortly after 09:04 hours, same date, I was aware that life had been pronounced extinct. I was aware that now deceased partner, Colette Bell, was within Kirkcaldy Police Station with DC Parker and DC Mitchell. Now, I think in your next statement, Perk 137, at page 2, paragraph 1, I can confirm that Colette Bell was not in Kirkcaldy Police Office just after 09:04. It was definitely closer to 10:45 when Parker and Mitchell brought her back.
That's correct.
And that's the correct position, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So Colette Bell phoned the police at 08:36. Parker and Mitchell travelled to her home address.
Yes.
They waited for her to arrive. And then they brought her back to Kirkcaldy Police Office later that morning.
Yes.
So she wasn't in Kirkcaldy at 09:04.
No.
Thank you. So from at some point after 09:04, you became aware that the man had died. Did you share that with Parker and Mitchell, who were waiting for Colette Bell at her house?
I don't know.
Would you have had reason to share that with them?
I may have done, but I genuinely can't say if I did or didn't.
There's nothing in your daybook that would allow you to answer that
No.
sort of question. But you've mentioned earlier today that at some point from Colette Bell's home, Parker and Mitchell, or there was contact with you at Kirkcaldy. There was a phone call.
Yes.
Do you remember who made that phone call to you? We've heard it was Parker.
I don't remember which one made the phone call.
Well, we've heard evidence that it was DC Parker that phoned and made some mention of a gold phone being owned by Mr. Bio. And we've heard that you had said a gold phone had been found at the locus. And that you had said, secure the house as a crime scene. And is that correct?
I don't remember the fine detail of the conversation between myself and Wayne, but certainly I would have asked Wayne. I don't remember getting that information about the gold mobile phone at that point. I think that was later. But I certainly spoke to him about, we don't know what's happened to Mr. Bayou. There's signs of disturbance at that address. We're looking to secure that address should it be required for any sort of scene examination.
And is there anything in your daybook that records the call that you had with Parker from Colette Bell's house?
I can't say it's certain that this has come through in the phone call, but the information that's written on 01066.
Let's get that on the screen for the moment. And that's the first page of your daybook. So it's on the right-hand side. Right. Sorry, carry on.
Now, I think this is information that's notes that I've taken during my conversation with DC Parker or DC Mitchell.
And what notes are you referring to?
The notes that are on the right-hand side of the page where it's got Colette Bell at the top and then underneath girlfriend.
And the reference to last seen.
Yes.
Any other notes in that section?
I think that page may actually be all information that I've taken during that time.
And this includes the racist comment that we talked about briefly
Yes.
before. So there's mention during this call of Saeed Sahid. And you've mentioned earlier at boxing. And then remind me, sorry, what it says after that.
It looks like back door open, house trashed.
And then after that, the next
Then
line.
it's got last and then a space, light blue jeans, stroke, navy blue top.
So the information up to the line halfway down that page could be information that was shared with you by DC Parker.
It may actually go beyond that as well, because it's got about boxing, Martin Dick. So that may have been known at that stage, or that information may have come once she's come back down to the police station. So I can't say for certain.
And then after that, what do we say? If we can go down the page, make sure we see the whole thing.
So you want me to read through this?
Do you think, yes, please do.
Yeah. So boxing, so this is underneath the line, boxing,
Yes.
and then it's got Martin Dick dash Kirkcaldy or KDY near to HA, and then it's got the name Sheku dash, and then I've got Locust Protection dash Kirkcaldy Police Station, and then a line, and then in kitchen dash next to jumper might have 2 phones, and then
What does it say at the end?
I can't say for certain what that is. I don't know if I've covered that in my statements.
Can you read it now?
Not accurately, no.
And then is that arrow to point to the next page, or?
I don't know. Oh, actually that says breastfeeding.
All right. So there is mention on the right-hand side page of maybe having 2 phones. So there's mention of a phone, no mention of a gold phone, but mention of a phone. And then you were aware at that time, and we've heard from Miss Bell, that she was breastfeeding her child at that time.
Yes.
And that information was shared with you as well.
Yes.
So it's possible that the information noted there is from a telephone conversation you had with DC Parker.
I think it is, yes.
And is there anything on the next page that you have in front of you that you think is relevant to the telephone call?
It goes on the next page
So this will be 6-7.
to 6-7, where it says no tattoos, no scars, small 1-inch scar, left shoulder, left cheek, indent, could be spot stroke chicken pox.
And what is this a
I
reference to?
honestly can't say whether that is something that's information that's come from that phone call, or whether that's potentially a description that's been given to me by someone else. So I can't say for certain where that's come from.
All right. Thank you. Can we then go back to your inquiry statement, please? Paragraph 128. Do you have that?
Yes.
It's on the screen. I believe I spoke to the officers that were speaking to Colette Bell at Shekobio's address at Arran Crescent. Information was for that locus to be secured and then searched. In terms of authorising the search, it's a thing that would done routinely to check if someone is hiding, or for example, if anyone's injured under the bed. That's why we do it. We don't turn things upside down. Explain to us then, you're talking about having spoken to the officers.
Yeah.
Information was for that locus to be secured and then searched. What does that mean?
So when you go back to my actual book there, in the one that's 01066, it's got locus protection dash Kirkcaldy Police Station. So I think what I'm saying at this stage is we still don't know what we've got here. There's a signs of disturbance that's occurred at that address. So my thoughts at that stage would be to remove the occupants, to allow that scene to be secured for potential scene examination. Now that would be done speaking to Miss Bell to effectively say that we don't know what's happened and we're looking to secure this scene, and then would you come to the police station to provide further details to us? And that's what I would look for to be done at that point.
And when you say information was for that locus to be secured and then searched, is that information from Colette Bell that is shared with you via DC Parker, as we've heard?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So when you're looking at paragraph 128,
Yes.
and you say information was for that locus to be secured and then searched, is that information that's coming from Colette Bell via Parker to
No,
you?
that for me would be me saying to the officers, I'd be looking for that to take place.
Right. And is that something that you said to the officers after the phone call or
That-
before?
No, that would be once we're up there, because we don't know what we're going to when you're first going there. So to try and get the information, I get that update, and I'm thinking, right, for me, that a potential scene, we might need to do an examination at that address, so that's why I would look to get that done.
And then at 129, it's from a safety point of view, it would come through me. A discussion between me and the SIO would confirm that we're looking to take that scene. The SIO's instructions would go through me to the DCs or the uniformed officers at the scene. Can you explain then, so you've had a call from DC Parker from the scene. You've been given information about the scene, about Colette Bell's house. Tell me when you contact the SIO.
I don't know if he was in the room next to me or not when I was getting these updates. He may have been. But that's something that I would be looking to speak to D.I. Robson about, to confirm that what I'm looking to do or what I'm thinking would be proportionate would be confirmed by him.
And if he was in the room, you could obviously speak to him.
Yeah.
If he's not in the room, how would you go about contacting him to get that instruction?
I would potentially go and try and find him in the station, or I would try and phone him.
Once you have an instruction from the SIO, do you then phone DC Parker or Mitchell back?
I don't know, because I don't know if Colin D.I. Robson was in the room with me or not. It may be that we've just spoken about it. Yep.
And the SIO was at that time Robson, Colin
Yes.
Robson. And then can we look at paragraph 130, the legal side of it, it's a hard one. Oh, sorry, 130, please. A lot of the time when you're seizing property, you're looking for consent. Otherwise, you're looking for a warrant and any examination or search authorised by a fiscal and then a sheriff. It goes back to preservation of life and detection of crime. For example, if something's happened at an address, you have to ensure people are safe and well and potentially obtain a warrant. If not, then you're not doing searches because you don't have authority to do so. So I'm interested in your understanding of the position when the police have authority to, first of all, seize a property and later to search a property. And what's your understanding of what the officers will do, first of all, to seize, to have the authority to seize a property?
You're effectively asking that person to say, listen, look, you've got your property and we are looking to secure that just now as part of this investigation. So you're asking them for permission to do that. Now,
Seeking consent.
seeking consent, yeah. In terms of the search that's mentioned there, once a property would be secured, I'd be looking for a walkthrough of that property to be done to make sure that there's no other person within that house who could potentially interfere with the scene as it was. This, though, was a concern for call as well by Miss Bell, concern for her partner. So I would expect officers, as we would do for any concern for missing person style investigation, would be to do a walkthrough of that address to say, are they here? Now, I don't know the fine detail of what was discussed between them at that time, but that's certainly what I would be doing if I was in the house.
So is it part of your role when you're originally tasking the officers, in this case Mitchell and Parker, to consider questions of the legal authority that you have or they will have to enter the property or to seize the property?
Is it part of my role to
Anticipate?
I don't remember a conversation before they went there round about that. I remember, let's just get up there and let's go and speak to her.
And should it have been part of your role to anticipate that authority may have been needed?
It could be, but you really don't know what you're going to until you go to that address. And because it's fast-paced at that time.
So was it something you considered in advance of sending Parker and Mitchell to Colette Bell's house?
No, for me it was, let's go up there and let's see what we've got.
And then once they have arrived and assessed what they've gone to, is it part of their role to come back to you and discuss the question of authority with you, or is that not necessary?
It's something that could be discussed certainly between us. I don't remember discussing the fine detail of that on that day.
Was there anything in your daybook that would suggest it was discussed?
No, I've not got any notes in relation to that.
And so you've mentioned here there's the option of consent.
Yes.
There's the possibility of obtaining a warrant.
Yes.
And you also talk about something called preservation of life and detection of crime. So that's if you're checking it's safe and there's no one hiding somewhere.
Yep.
And is that a sort of third option that the police can go in to check if, preservation of life and detection of crime?
Well, not so much the detection of crime, because we can't just go and go into somebody's house to detect a crime, but preservation of life is the core function of the police effectively, and we'll regular for missing persons and things like that go and check an address.
And can they do that without consent or without a warrant for the purposes of preservation of life?
For preservation of life, my expectation would be you could enter a property if you've got reason to believe that is there someone injured in there, or that needs emergency assistance. Your expectation is you would go and do that.
And on this occasion, the call has been made by Miss Bell herself to come out and
Yes.
to explain the house that's
Yes.
in a... So, in terms of Miss Bell's house, the officers have arrived. They've had a conversation with you on the phone. You've not had a conversation about legal authority. Knowing what you knew about the scene, I think you said in your statement that you wanted the locus to be secured and then searched. I think a moment ago you've said about secure it and potentially for scene examination.
Yes.
I think that's the phrase
Yes.
you said. Now, what authority, what legal power did the police have to, first of all, secure or seize the house?
That would come through conversation with Miss Bell and asking effectively for the consent.
So is that consent?
Yes, at that point, yeah.
We've heard from another officer in evidence, a DC Finch, that one of the ways to make sure consent is given is to give a full explanation, explain it's voluntary. They can remove that consent at any time. And he talked about writing it in his notebook and having it signed by the owner of a property.
Yes.
Is that good practice? Is that something you would
Definitely.
approve of? And you say that you said that Miss Bell's house was considered to be a crime scene. Was that because of the state of the property, as far as you were aware?
Potential crime scene, signs of disturbance. I'm thinking, what's happened here? So, yeah, that could be a scene of something that's taken place.
So this was not a situation that day where any warrant was sought in relation to Miss Bell's house?
No, not at the time I was involved.
Can we look at paragraph 131, please? And you say, I don't remember on that day if there were concerns from the people in relation to the properties, meaning the householders effectively. I don't know if there was consent recorded or not. I don't know if further down the line there were warrants granted for examinations that took place. I wasn't aware of anyone refusing police access because nothing was raised to me. If nothing was raised, then the householders were fine with that, with what's taking place. If there had been an issue with any of the properties, then it would feed back to me and I'd refer that to the SIO. And we'd be thinking, should we be obtaining warrants? I don't remember checking this with the officers on the day. I don't remember checking with the officers that they had permission from the householders to secure the property. So let's just look at that paragraph for a moment. If we can go back up. So, thinking back now, do you remember if any of the officers who went to any of the properties that you had listed as loci or locuses in your daybook mentioned that there were any concerns or problems with removing the householders?
The only thing I remembered was later on in the day was there was a concern in relation to someone who may have mobility issues. Now I think they were trying to sort that effectively, so I remember getting an update at some point saying we've got issues in relation to someone with mobility issues and we're trying to effectively solve it.
So that was a phone call later in the day?
Yes.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
So your role, and you've talked about the priority actions, the fast track actions, you've referred us to page 1 of your daybook and the different addresses that you've got listed. And I'm trying to understand here, if you were tasking those priority actions, why you say here that you don't know if there were concerns from householders, you don't know if there was consent, you don't know if warrants were granted, you weren't aware of anyone refusing police access. You've talked about you tasking those priority actions and you assisting with that part of the investigation. Why would you not be aware of these things?
I don't remember anyone coming back to me to tell me there were issues raised in relation to what they'd been asked to do. Now, it's maybe wrong of me that I should have checked that, but I don't remember doing that.
Well, do you think you should have checked those things?
Yeah.
I mean, looking back now, would
Yeah.
you want to be in a position to say
Yes.
you had checked?
Yes.
Could we look at paragraph 132, further down the page? I don't know anything about what was seized. My involvement ended when I went off duty. I fed back to the SIO that these properties have been secured. They would then discuss among themselves what to do with the property, but I wasn't party to any involvement in that. The SIO or PERC would be effectively responsible for the property overall. Can you tell us, you say your involvement ended when you went off duty. Do you remember what time you went off duty?
It was late, 11 o'clock at night maybe.
And prior to going off duty, did you have some sort of briefing or update for the SIO?
I don't remember a particular sit-down brief later on at night. I was given information throughout the course of the day. I don't remember a particular finish to that.
When it says I fed back to the SIO, presumably are you still talking about Robson there?
Yes, I would still speak to Colin.
So I fed back to the SIO that these properties have been secured. When did you feed that back to him?
That would have been done throughout the course of the day as these loci were effectively secured.
So that was a rolling feedback rather than one particular briefing? Or
Yes.
And then you say they would then discuss among themselves what to do with the property. Who is they when you refer to they?
I'm thinking at that point, well, who's actually got control of that investigation at that point would then be, for me, making the decisions round about what they're doing at each of these loci.
Right. Can I ask you to move on to paragraph 136, please? So, you've said this is in relation to Colette Bell's house. This is asking for her consent to seize the house and search it. I don't recall discussing the legal basis to seize the property with DC Andrew Mitchell. Effectively, if Colette Bell is not raising any difficulties with the search, then she's consented to it. I'm interested in that comment. If a householder simply doesn't raise issues, do you assume that that's consent?
I would prefer written consent. That's what you want, eh?
As we heard about from DC Finch,
Yes.
in the notebook with the signature.
Yeah, that would be best practice for me. I don't know if that was done on the day or not.
As part of the obtaining consent and noting it in the notebook, DC Finch also talked about it's important to explain the purpose of the search so that the occupier understands that it can be consent can be withdrawn at any time. Is that the sort of information you'd want a householder or an occupier to have available to them?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you about when a house is seized and maybe searched. I'd like to ask you some questions about the officers who are at the scene and a discretion they may have to recover belongings from the house. Now, we've heard some evidence from householders who they've left the house at the request of officers, if I can put it as generally as that, but on occasion they've forgotten to take something with them that they would have liked to have had from the house. Could you tell us, for officers who are attending at houses and maybe seizing the home, what power do they have, what discretion do they have to allow people to maybe return to the home to recover things they've forgotten, or for the officers themselves to retrieve items?
So you mean in the officers potentially are sitting on a locus protection, so it could be like a uniformed officer sitting on a door?
It could be a uniformed officer, or it could be an officer who's saying, I want to seize this house, getting the occupiers out of the house, but then the occupier says, I've forgotten something. I'd like to retrieve something. That type of situation. We've heard quite a bit of evidence about that.
Okay.
What can the officers do in that situation?
They would normally come back to look for approval that you can go back into that scene, because...
Who do they get that from?
They could come to me for my views on that, or potentially an SIO or another sergeant or someone.
And I interrupted you there, sorry. You were about to say because, and explain why they would have to get approval.
Yep, sorry, yes.
It was my fault to interrupt you, I'm sorry.
So you've got a scene, and generally with the police, once a scene's secured, you want to keep it as is for the integrity of that scene, so it's there. So if there's photographs getting taken, if there's important evidence that's there, it's still in situ, it's not been moved, there's nothing tampered with. So generally, if I've got a scene and it's come from consent, I would try and speak to that person and say, listen, look, if it's really not essential, I would prefer we don't go back in there, because I don't want to interrupt and affect the integrity of that scene.
So you'd give an explanation?
Yes, you would try and talk it through them with them.
And when you say, if it's not essential, what sort of things are you thinking about would be essential or not essential?
I think I got asked on that day in relation to, was it breastfeeding equipment? And I remember just saying, aye, yeah, because I was thinking, it was just common sense. So, you don't want to be interrupting the scenes, but at the same time, you've got to get that baby's needing fed. So that was one example I could think of on that day.
Do you remember who that related to?
That was the first address, Miss Bell's address.
So it was Miss Bell?
Yes.
We've heard evidence that she was breastfeeding her baby at that time in May 2015, and had requested express milk for her baby, and one of the officers had returned to the house and got that for her.
Okay.
So you're quite comfortable that officers can do that, even though the house had been seized?
I'm sure they asked me for it. I'm sure they asked me about that.
So would that be officers Mitchell and Parker had made that request?
Yes, at that address, yeah.
And you had given your approval?
Yes.
Did you have any other requests that day from any of the other properties for your approval?
I don't remember any others.
Can you think of any reason why an officer in that situation would not collect express milk for a breastfeeding mother where the house has been seized?
See if that house has been seized, and this was in the circumstances, this is just a general idea, right? If there was blood in a kitchen and and it went over the milk and things like that, and it was a complete stranger and you didn't have a clue, you maybe be doing footwear marks in the ground and stuff like that, that's when you would say, no, we really can't go in. But on that day, there was signs of general disturbance. It was our own house. She'd been in it before. The officers had also been in it. So for me, it made common sense for them to go and take that item and take it.
So does it require officers to just apply a bit of common sense, but to seek approval from their more senior manager, officer?
Yep.
but to apply a bit of common sense to the situation.
Yes.
And would the same apply to someone who says they've forgotten medication that they need? Or their mother has forgotten medication that they need?
If that was medication that was required for the ongoing treatment and it couldn't be picked up from ASDA's or something like that.
Well, this was a Sunday, and we've heard evidence that someone had left medication and their mother had left medication in the house.
And unless there was anything, if that question had come to me now, and unless there was anything at that scene that I was really concerned about officers going back in and potentially interfering, I would be saying recover the medication.
Do you remember that day receiving any calls at all about, other than the one you've mentioned relating to Colette Bell, about a call in relation to medication being sought, or a breast pump, or express milk? Do you remember any other calls about someone trying to retrieve those items?
No.
And just so I'm clear, this would relate to what you had noted as Mr. Said's house. We've heard evidence from his family,
Yes,
wider
sorry about
family,
the...
that those were items that were sought, but they weren't allowed to recover from the house.
Sorry, who said that they weren't allowed to recover items?
Mrs. Rashid has given evidence, who
Okay.
is Said's sister,
Right.
and she's given evidence to the chair that she had left the house, had forgotten her breast pump and express milk for her baby, that she was breastfeeding, 8 weeks old, that she and her baby had had recent operations, that they'd forgotten medication, and that her mother had forgotten medication, and they weren't permitted to recover that, and the officers would not go back in to recover that.
I'm not aware of that.
Not aware of any
No.
of that? No calls made to you about any of
no,
that?
I don't remember that.
Can we move on to when the officers come back to Kirkcaldy Police Office with Colette Bell, please? DC Mitchell had said it was your instruction to bring Colette Bell back to Kirkcaldy Police Office. Can you explain why you wanted her brought to the police station?
It's quite common when you're dealing with investigations like this, where if you're looking to secure an address, it allows you then to bring the person to the police station to effectively start then noting their statement and gathering information from them.
You didn't think it was appropriate to speak to her while she was in her own house?
But at that point, you know, they're talking about the disturbance, signs of disturbance in the address, so for me it would be better to keep that as it is, just in case that was linked. So that's why we would ask somebody to come away from the house.
Thank you. We've heard from DC Mitchell that they brought her back to Kirkcaldy Police Office, and if we look at paragraph 90 of your inquiry, sorry, not your inquiry statement, we've heard it was either about 10:45 or 11 o'clock in the morning. Would that be round about the time that you think she was back? I think I mentioned one of your perk statements earlier and you'd said 10:45.
I think it must be around about that time, because I've written 10:45 in my book when I'm speaking to D.I. Robson and D.C. Parker, so she must have been back at the station at that time.
And are you looking at your daybook again?
Yes.
Is that the first or the second page?
It's actually
Is it
6-8.
6-8? Let's have that on the screen for a moment. So this is 6-8, and where do you see the...
And it's
The time
almost
you
halfway down the page, 10:45 and then dash.
And what does it say there?
It says 10:45 dash and then chunk.
And after that?
Death message dash DC Parker, tell Colette blackmail dead.
Right. What's that a reference to at 10:45?
That's a reference to me being in the office, and Wayne had come up and was giving us an update.
Wayne Parker.
Wayne Parker had come up, and I think the information potentially above may have come from Colette. So Wayne's comes up, giving me an update, and during that time, he's mentioned about a gold mobile phone. Now, it's at that point, because I'm sure there was either a gold mobile phone, either found on Mr. Bay or found at the scene, and I remember at that time saying, it's got to be him. So, and it was at that point, 10:45, myself and Colin Robson spoke briefly and said, we've got to tell Kelly.
I'd like to try and get a clear picture of what's happening at this time. We've heard from Mitchell and Parker that they brought Colette Bell back, put her into the first interview room at Kirkcaldy Police Station, that Mitchell remained with her and the baby and her mum Lorraine Bell, and Parker came upstairs, as he put it, to speak to you.
Yes.
So when we see these notes that you've made in your daybook on the left-hand side, when were they made?
I think that's when Wayne's come up the stairs and given me an update of the further information about what the circumstances were.
So would this be at the point they've arrived back in Kirkcaldy and just telling you that that's them back, or?
Yeah, effectively that's, so I think he's come up and actually given me an update at that point, where he goes on to say, last seen yesterday afternoon, going to Martin Dix, Zahid Saeed. Then 11:30 hours, spoke to partner, someone disrespecting him. And then Zahid calls 07:30 hours, he went off on one. Now, I think that's information that's come from Colette to those officers.
To Parker and Mitchell?
Yes.
And then the 10:45 reference, which is under the line and the reference to Martin Dick, that's your discussion with DC Robson at that time?
Yes.
Now, was DC Parker with you when you contacted Robson, or was Robson in the room with you both?
I don't know if D.I. Robson was there when Wayne come up to give me the update or not, or whether I got him and said, go and come and listen because this is significant.
So by 10:45 you knew that the male had been pronounced life extinct. You've noted that in a previous page of your daybook. And at this stage, there's mention of a death message. Now, who's Chunk? I think you mentioned it in your statement.
Yeah, I do. It's D.I. Robson.
So you knew him reasonably well. That's a nickname, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. And who gave you the instruction to deliver the death message to Colette Bell?
We spoke, and we spoke through it, and I don't know who come out and said exactly what, but I just remember writing, we wrote there, tell Colette blackmail dead, because we wanted to be clear that we thought it may be her partner.
And when you say we spoke, are you talking about DC Robson?
Myself and D.I. Robson, yeah.
D.I. Robson, sorry,
Yeah.
D.I. Robson. And then can we look at perk 136, please? Page 2, paragraph 4. It's nice for me to have the right page and paragraph number. Do you have that in front of you?
Page 2, paragraph 4.
Yes. Now,
Yep.
this is the statement that you prepared yourself on the 4th of May at 11 in the morning. So page 2, paragraph 4, you say, about 10:45 hours, this is the 3rd of May, I spoke with D.I. Robson and the decision was made to inform Colette Bell that a black male had been found dead. Is that your recollection the day after? And is that what we saw in your handwritten daybook you've just mentioned?
That's a statement I've compiled the day after, but the only difference is I've got there is found dead, and in my daybook it's got tell Colette blackmail dead and not found dead.
Right. When you prepared your handwritten notes in your daybook, how long after the discussion with Robson was that prepared, or was it contemporaneous?
That was written when we've made that.
During the conversation?
That was written at 10:45, because I remember thinking, we've got to tell her, and I wrote that down.
Blackmail dead?
Yes.
And then the day after, at 11 in the morning, on the 4th of May, you record this as, I spoke with D.I. Robson and the decision was made to inform Colette Bell that a blackmail had been found dead. Now, looking at that information now, do you remember whether the conversation with D.I. Robson was to the effect that a blackmail had been found dead? The word found is there. Or do you think your handwritten notes are a more accurate reflection of what D.I. Robson told you?
I've written the word found there the day after. However, my recollection is we didn't go into the circumstances of Mr. Bayo being found dead, because he wasn't found dead. He was found by the police and subsequently died. So
looking at your handwritten notes and comparing what we see here in your statement of the 4th of May,
yeah,
what do you think is accurate?
I think the most accurate is the message to tell Colette that a blackmail is dead.
Right. And then you go on in your PERC statement, page 2, paragraph 4, I relayed this information to DC Parker. I instructed that this information be relayed to Colette Bell, and the reason that we suspected it may be her partner was that the police had also recovered a gold mobile phone similar to that owned by the deceased. And so that's where you shared that with DC Parker and told them to go and tell Colette Bell.
Yes.
Right. Now, I'm conscious of the time. Would that be
A convenient point to stop. Well, we'll stop and sit again at 2 o'clock.